Hisory Of Avaition Poscast with Derrick, Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
I want to welcome everybody into the History of Aviation Podcast for this episode 11. I am Derrick Beeler, and as always, I am joined by Mr. Dave Gorman and David Rowe. What have you guys been up to, starting with you, David Rowe?
Well, it's been a little bit wet and windy and snowy today and the last few days, so not a lot of outside work. Mostly indoors. I've been updating my aerofoil website and making some videos to go on my aerofoil YouTube. So aviation-wise, it's all been computer work. But hoping for some good weather here soon so I can get outside and start shooting some more airplanes.
Dave Gorman?
Well, I've been excited to realize that we're already a month into winter. So it's moving along slowly. I went to a meeting last night at 6 o'clock, and somebody was checking in and just kind of updating us on how things were going with them. And they said, I was so excited I got here before dark. You know, the daylight is creeping
this time
back.
Of year, for sure.
You know, a minute a day adds up, so it feels a little bit better. So
I get off work at 5 o'clock, and I'm racing home just to beat dark.
Yeah,
you know,
every little bit helps. So I enjoy that. But things are good. Busy with school, of course, but haven't had a good week, and looking forward to talking airplanes again with you guys. We missed it a little bit here, so got a great one to discuss today.
And we have a jewel, don't we?
Absolutely. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom. Man, what another icon, a easily recognizable aircraft. Single seat, 2-seat fighter, interceptor, dogfighter, ground attack, wild weasel, so many different roles. My God, it flew for both the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels at the same time. They both were flying this aircraft. So it saw service in the Marine Corps, the Navy, the U.S. Air Force, and then, 11 or 12 different air forces around the world. So just a brute force type of aircraft, lots of power, lots of muscle, lots of heavy lift capability. And man, oh man, what a difference maker. Had to be a fun plane to fly in.
Yeah, it's an absolute legend of aviation, no doubt. And speaking about, it did fly with the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds at the same time, 69 to 73. And then the oil crisis came along, and they decided to move on to some smaller jets, better fuel efficiency on those. So the Phantom was moved off of that. And the other thing you mentioned was it was in service with like 11 different countries. At the time, it had more frontline service, was in service with more first-line countries than any other jet. So more countries were using it as their primary fighter than any other jet. And we were using it in all three services. And that was the first time that one jet was used across Marine, Air Force, and Navy until the F-35, which is current. So there's only two that have been used by all three services.
Wow. That's pretty impressive, though. I guess I was thinking about, we talked before about the OB-10 Bronco, and I think that might have seen service as a turboprop aircraft and with the Marine Corps, with the Air Force, and with the Navy flew Broncos too. So I think, right, Dave?
Yeah, I believe they did, but this was specifically on first line fighters. I mean, there's no other jet that has done that. It was the first one to do it.
So it really says a lot about its availability, the fact that it was so flexible in its mission, its capabilities, and I don't know, it seemed like it was a popular plane to fly.
Well, certainly was. They made over 5,000 of these things, so there were a lot of them to go around.
Yeah, I read that they were saying this was the most produced U.S. jet fighter. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was up there with, World War II type production. Most of the other jets didn't come anywhere near that number.
No. They're impressive.
Yeah, very impressive. Interestingly, it was a design that was a failure at the first. It was supposed to be an update of the Demon fighter that they had, the F-4 Demon, and the Navy was like, "No, we don't really need a single seat twin engine jet. We've already got the Crusader and the Panther and some other jets, the Skyhawk. Well, we'll wait." But the McDonnell Corporation stuck with it and redesigned it a little bit. And when the Navy came back with, well, we want a fleet defender, we want something that can be an interceptor, bigger, that shoots missiles. Well, they had it on the drawing board and came out with what became the Phantom. So it's a good design that they just developed and turned it into a winner.
Well, and as we were saying earlier, they were able to hang a lot of ordnance on it. Big bomb load. I believe it carried as much, if not more, than B-17s did.
It could carry 18,000 pounds, which is 3 times what a B-17 can carry.
Oh my gosh! Okay, I was way off. Holy smokes! Yeah, that's an incredible number to think about. Of course, jet power will do that for you, but just to have all that, and this was not an internal bomb load. These were all external stores, I think, right?
It had 11 hard points on the underneath of it. So yes, it could carry a little bit of everything. Here's an interesting fact for you. We're talking about how big this is and how much it can carry. The actual F-4 weighs in unloaded at 30,000 pounds. An F-16, which is our today's, Air Force fighter, it only weighs empty 15,600 pounds.
Oh my
Literally
God.
Half, it weighs twice as much as what our current air superiority fighter does.
Oh my gosh. Well, they had those big cans on there, those big engines that just power through all that kind of stuff. But now this is a plane that again carried a lot of different types of weapons and weapon systems, but initially it was designed without a gun, right? That's kind of the thinking of its time, huh?
Well, the thinking of the military at the time was, yes, we're not going to dogfight anymore. Our planes and our equipment are so good. Our missiles are so good. We're just going to sit back and shoot you down from a distance. And the Vietnam War proved that's not the case. You've still got to be a fighter pilot in a fighter plane. You've got to get in close and you've got to shoot them down close. And guns are always going to be the best part for that. So yes, it was originally without guns, but it soon found guns in it.
There were some real issues with pilot training at the time. I mean, it wasn't the fault of the pilots. It just wasn't a part of air-to-air doctrine with that type of close-in combat maneuvering and, managing your speed and your maneuvering, everything that you had to keep up with. So there was a pretty steep learning curve that was, we lost a lot of aircraft early on. F-105s come to mind pretty readily, but the Phantom was, I think I read it was the most successful MiG killer in Vietnam with 44 kills, I believe, air-to-air kills.
Yes, I did read that. So yeah, you're correct. It was. Well, I mean, we got Top Gun out of that experience. That they realized pretty quickly that their pilots just weren't up to the level they needed to be. They needed that close-in combat training, and so the Navy started Top Gun exactly to solve that issue.
Solve it, they sure did. They took it head on and developed the tactics and the training to make the most out of the machinery and equipment that they had. So they began to rack up some pretty impressive numbers. But as we said earlier, and I'll give a little personal history, this was a plane that saw service with the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. My first air show I ever went to in 1970, I saw the Blue Angels flying the F-4 Phantom, and it was a gorgeous plane. The paint job and everything was just that dark blue and the yellow trim and everything, and it just it was a beautiful thing to see flying in formation. And I don't know that I think I saw them one more time, maybe in 1973 with the Blue Angels. and that was it. I did see the Thunderbirds with the F-4 a time or two. And it's kind of cool sometimes to see planes that are on display that are painted up as Blue Angel Phantoms or Blue Angel or Thunderbird Phantoms as well. I know that we have one down in David,
Athens.
Yeah,
Athens.
thank you. I knew it began with an A. Down in Athens, there's an F-4 there painted up in Thunderbirds in real dramatic fashion, pointing up at the sky. And I think in Cleveland they've got one of each. They have two Phantoms on display at the airport there. One painted up as a Blue Angel, another one painted up as a Thunderbird, which got to be a pretty cool display.
Yeah, absolutely. I've stopped at that VFW in Athens and taken pictures of that Thunderbird Phantom. It's impressive.
It actually served with the Thunderbirds, right?
Yes, I believe it did.
That particular
Correct.
airframe. Sometimes they'll paint up a plane to represent one that flew with the team, but that one actually did, I believe. So, sadly, there are no active F-4s flying in our military unless there might be a few drones that are still kicking around. But this one's been retired for some time from the U.S., huh?
Yeah, the United States retired it in 1996 from fighter duties. We kept them around until 2016 as a target drone. And as far as I know, we don't use them anymore. The U.S. doesn't. However, Germany still flew them until 2013. Japan just retired theirs in 2021. And I believe Iran still has a number of them, sort of like their F-14s. They have them. Don't know. Nobody knows if they're still flyable or not. But I've also got South Korea, Greece, and Turkey listed as possible still using it to this day.
Well, it was an airplane that you were very likely to see at air shows in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s as well. There were some up in Dayton that I went to in the 90s, and they often had a flight of four of the reconnaissance version F-4s, the RF-4s, that would fly by in formation, and they would say, "Oh, we're taking your picture," wave. Who knew if they were or not, but we all waved because it was still cool to see these kind of dark gray Phantoms going by. I went to a show in Sumter, South Carolina a time or two back in the early 90s, and they had probably 20 RF-4s that were on the line there that you could see. That was just really, really cool. They were still on active duty there.
Oh, that's amazing. Were you in Oshkosh in 2016 when they flew the last two in before they retired them?
I was. And I'm glad that you brought that up so I could talk about my time at Oshkosh.
Certainly, anytime.
We'll get you there sometime. Yeah, they had two that came in, flew over, just hot, afterburners, smoky cans and everything, and put on a nice little couple of passes and everything, and then landed, flew a time or two the rest of the week. And these were planes that had already been outfitted as drones, but they had pilots that were flying them, that were at the controls. But it was a very bittersweet experience because, as cool as it was, we were being told this will be the last time that we'll see them up in this part of the country. Then I think they were retired, I believe, at Holloman in New Mexico within a few months of that appearance up at Oshkosh.
Yeah, that was one. I actually watched that one on my computer. They do live streams of their air shows, and so I always watched the live stream. And I remember watching those guys come in and just beat it up for a little bit and thinking, well, that's it. That's it for us. We're not going to see them around anymore.
It makes me sad as I get older to realize that there are aircraft that were once pretty common, and now they're down to just a few survivors, perhaps, that are in civilian hands, and a lot of them never made it that far, but you're not going to see a Phantom fly again in this country. So,
well,
I was going to say that there are Phantoms on display that are not far from here. A couple within pretty easy driving distance. We mentioned the one in Athens. There's also a very historic one up at Dayton, Ohio, at the Air Force Museum. that was flown by Colonel Robin Olds in Vietnam, and he had been a fighter pilot in Korea and also, I believe, in World War II as well. Is that correct?
Well, it's backwards. He was an ace in World War II. I think he had about 13 kills in World War II. He skipped Korea, didn't fly during Korea, and he came back for Vietnam and flew in Vietnam. And an interesting story about him, since we're going to talk about aces, we'll talk about some aces here. So he was flying in Vietnam. He's credited with 4 kills.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Well, that exactly. He's never claimed the 5th because if he claimed it, supposedly he would have been sent home. So he never claimed a 5th kill. However, the story is he made more than 5 kills, but we don't know that for sure because he never took credit. There are 5 people that are aces from Vietnam. Charles Chuck de Bellevue had 6 kills. Randall Duke Cunningham had 5. William Driscoll had 5, Steve Ritchie had 5, and Jeff Feinstein had 5. Now, the interesting part about this is of those aces, 2 are pilots, 3 are backseaters. They are the weapon system officer in the back, the WISO. So de Bellevue, Driscoll, and Feinstein all are backseaters, but they're aces. So it's interesting that only Cunningham and Ritchie were actual pilots that are aces out of that group. So interesting to discuss. Cool. Yeah.
Well, Robin Olds' aircraft that he flew in Vietnam is on display at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. He took out 2 MiG-17s on the same day in May of 1967. His backseater was a guy named Stephen Croker, and so he's honored with an aircraft up there. He what was the name on that aircraft? Scat was it Scat 16 or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pretty. He named his aircraft Scat. Several of them in a row there. Now you mentioned Jeff Feinstein. I recognized his name because also not too far from East Tennessee. Up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, there's a Phantom on display at the outdoor museum they have in Bowling Green, Aviation Heritage. It actually was flown by Brigadier General Dan Cherry, and Dan Cherry shot down a MiG-21 in April of '72, and his backseater was Jeff Feinstein. So very cool. I had a chance to meet Dan Cherry a couple of months ago, and they had an open cockpit day up there in Bowling Green, and it was really, really cool. And he's just a sweet, kind, grandfatherly looking guy, and really, he's not a big man at all. I'm 6'6", and so he might be 5'6", perhaps. And I was thinking, how in the world could I fit into that cockpit? Believe me, I wanted to try. But he actually has made contact many years ago with the pilot that he shot down, and they're friends. They communicated with each other quite a bit. General Cherry wrote a book about his experience with this reconciliation, and really beautiful story that came out of that. But the actual aircraft that he was flying when he shot down the MiG-21 in 1972 is on display in Bowling Green.
Well, that's one I've got to go up and see. I haven't actually been to that one yet. There are several in our area. The Hisory Aviation Museum up in Hickory, North Carolina's got a Phantom. The Mighty Eighth Museum in Savannah, Pooler, Georgia has one. Obviously, the Air and Space Museum has it. Udvar Hazy. The USS Yorktown has it in their hangar in Charleston. We talked about the USAF Museum. Warner Robins Air Force Base Museum has a Phantom. The Yankee Air Museum in Michigan has one as well. So there's several in our area. I did a quick count, and I counted over 120 Phantoms on display in the United States. So
it'd be hard to find one, and you could probably do a pretty good run of all the different makes too, all the different models. Most of those I mean, maybe at least from the E's on, they would exist. Maybe I think there's some D's and the RF4Cs. Some of those
Correct.
exist too. So you
Yes,
could
they sure do.
probably make a pretty good run through all the different marks there.
Yeah, for sure.
I do hate that so many ended up splashed in the Atlantic Ocean as target drones. Kind of an ignoble end for such a glorious aircraft, but serving until the end, they were.
Well, they build them, they fly them, and they shoot them down. That's kind of their lifespan.
Now, you mentioned earlier, and I did not know this. I was doing a little research for the show, of course, and I saw something that I did not realize. You're talking about how Japan flew Phantoms, and those were actually built in Japan, weren't they? Those were not McDonnell Douglas built.
That is correct. They were built by the Mitsubishi Corporation in Japan, so they are license built, and I believe they built over 120 themselves.
Number I saw was like 138 or so, so that's pretty impressive. And over 500 or 5,057 came out of St. Louis. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's a 20-year lifespan. They built them for 20 years and 5,000 aircraft. So there you go.
You got to think there were fathers and sons on that line with each other.
Oh, absolutely. I guarantee you it happened.
Impressive stuff.
Yeah. The one of the interesting things, the RAF took several Phantoms, but they re-engined it with their own. Oh gosh, I forgot the name of it now. But they had a different engine in the British version. They chose their own engine. So I guess
is that like a Rolls-Royce Spey or something like that?
That's it. Yes, sir. That's it.
To mind?
Yes.
Okay. Derrick, you impressed? I pulled that one out.
I enjoyed it. Loved it. I'm just taking it all in.
That's it. No, that was. It's there was some freedom for these guys to for these other operators to adjust and modify as conditions required. So,
yeah, well, that's the great part about it. It was interchangeable. They could make changes and it still worked as good as ever.
Yeah. When I realized that Israel and Iran both operated this, I started thinking, well, gosh, they could have seen action against each other. That would have been a frightening thought.
Well, yeah, you've got that right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Israel, they used it in the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and Iran used it versus Iraq in the 1980s. And so, yeah, they did get some use outside of the U.S. in combat.
David, can you explain the kind of curious position of the tail piece? You've got that the tail plane that hangs down at an angle, while the wing tips come up a little bit at an angle.
Yes, actually, there was some instability in the aircraft that they discovered through wind tunnel tests and some early flights. So they needed to add some dihedral to the plane. And so they canted the outer edges of the wings up, I believe, 24 degrees. That equals a 5-degree dihedral across the full wing. And the same thing in the back is by canting them antihedral. That provided some better stability, kept them out of the jet. And it was all for stability reasons to make the jet a good gun platform or a missile platform in the first place. But yeah, it was instability in flight.
It's really something. When I was thinking about that, I was laughing because I had a kid come up to me at school last week with just a regular looking paper airplane that he'd built, and he threw it, and I'm like, yeah, let's see how it goes. We're in class, but towards the end of the day, so he throws it and it didn't fly too well. So I said, well, let's adjust a few things. And next thing I know, I'm kind of folding little bits of the paper, kind of like an F-4 Phantom tail. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's where that comes from. It's all about stability, make it will balance and stay in a stable forward flight. So,
yeah, it's that amazing engineering went into that jet, because it's not your typical sleek jet that you would expect from the 50s. You've got the F-104s or the F-102s, they're kind of sleek and quick looking. And, the F-4 is not. It's big. It's thick. It just, it's a brick in the sky.
It's got some things that, kind of stick out into the slipstream a little bit, which kind of reminded me of the some of the Russian jets that, they just kind of brute powered their way through aerodynamic issues. What do they call the at the engine intakes? What do they call that that little flap that's right up against the side of the fuselage that I think is adjustable and they can control the airflow into the engine?
Yes, there is a name for it, and I remember seeing it, and now I can't recall it.
But it's big and movable, and gives some control, some extra control to the pilot. And again, when you read what people had to say who flew this plane, they loved it. It was a it may have been a flying brick in some ways, but it was a sleek brick. It was a fast brick. I mean, it set tons of speed records and climb records. And when you read about some of the accounts of the dogfights and Duke Cunningham's that scissor roll thing that he was doing, highly maneuverable and for such a big plane, these guys felt really safe in that thing, and they weren't fearful about taking on some of North Vietnam's best pilots, or maybe they were Russian pilots. Depends on on where they took off from, I guess.
Yeah, that is true. Speaking of some of the world records that the Phantom set, the second prototype flew to 30,000 feet, killed the engines, restarted the engines, and that was the highest ever engine start stop up until the F-22 just recently beat that. So it held that record for many years. It was a cross country flight from coast to coast in 2 hours and 47 minutes. And that lasted until the SR-71 came along and beat it at 1 hour and 7 minutes. So, when you're getting beat by the SR-71, you're in some elite class there. Top speed was 1,452 miles an hour, about 2.2 Mach. And that was the top until the SR-71 beat it. So, you're just in high company there. And here's an interesting one that I thought was really neat. In 1972, Major Phil Hands Handley was flying supersonic and made a gun kill on a MiG-19 with his Vulcan cannon. So supersonic, and he shot down. Yes. It's the only supersonic gun kill that we know of.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine that, supersonic and just getting a gun kill. That's unbelievable.
They tracked him, I guess, with the weapons systems officer was tracking him and located him. And, why not? Let's take a shot, see what we can come up with, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Was it luck? Was it skill? Either way, it worked.
Still talking about it 50 years later, so I guess it was good.
Absolutely.
So this plane had air-to-air refueling capability, correct?
Yes, it sure did. I believe it started out with the drogue and chute for the Navy, and then when the Air Force took their version, they actually put the probe on it so that it could refuel with regular Air Force equipment.
Yeah, very important. There's a story, and Dave, I should have told you I wanted to ask you about this. I know it a little bit, counting on your superior research skills. The Pardo push. Do you know that story?
Yeah, I know a short version of it. I don't know all the details, but basically a Phantom gets shot up and the other guy pulls underneath him and pushes him back to the coast.
His plane is all busted up and he's in trouble, and he's just trying to get feet wet to get out over the water where it's a little bit safer and get picked up by search and rescue. But he's losing speed and losing altitude, and so one of his wingman perhaps comes up behind him has him lower his resting hook, his tail hook, which he then the pilot trailing then puts that trail hook right in front of his cockpit, and then comes in and is actually making contact and pushing him, keeping him airborne, and pushing him further out into. And I believe ultimately, he was able to eject over the coast and was over the water and was rescued, but he saved his life. I mean, the plane was not going to make it back, but that the famous, I think it was called the Pardo push, was a pretty impressive piece of flying and teamwork, and showed the trust that these guys had in their machines.
Oh, absolutely. Anything you can do to help, leave no one behind, just get them home.
Well, and this was an aircraft that there were a lot of stories being told, a lot of important missions that it flew, and it was trusted to keep the skies clear. They took after mission reconnaissance photos, and they were fast enough to do that quickly and get out over the hot spots and get back and bring that film so the mission planners could decide what might need to be hit again, or if they dropped the target they were trying to drop. I mean, it was really active in so many different areas, so many different fronts.
Well, being used by 3 services, and they all have different uses and different needs, and it filled them all. So, yeah, absolutely. Just a stellar aircraft with a great track record.
Well, it really was a joy to see fly. And, we have videos. We could look at those again if we have to. And I don't know if anybody wants to go to Greece, or maybe not Iran, but Turkey, to see what they might still have happening. I think they're all grounded, but you never know what they might have doing fast taxis or something, just in tribute to all those years of service.
Yeah, that would be an amazing sight to see today.
Well, one that you'd take for granted 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You'd think, gosh, they're going to be flying forever.
Well, that reminds me, there are a couple of Phantoms in the U.S. that you could see fly. Doesn't the Collins Foundation have one that's flyable?
They do.
And although they're not flying much right now due to some issues they're having, but that's still a possibility. And I did read that there's one in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's under restoration. I have no idea what its status is, but that's at least an airframe possibility that we might see sometime in the future. So there are a couple of opportunities here in the U.S. It's just they're few and far between.
Got to have some deep pockets to keep that thing in the air.
Oh, yeah. The gas bill on it's got to be impressive.
Yep.
So, well, guys, we'll jump into closing thoughts of the Phantom here, starting with you, Dave Gorman.
Well, as I mentioned, this was a plane that made an early impression on me, and just as always captured my imagination and captured my thought of, what in the world is this thing? It's just a brute of an aircraft built for speed and power and air-to-air superiority, all those roles and missions. One I never got tired of seeing, one I always enjoy. I love reading about individual airframes and what they where those planes served and what their duties were, what their jobs were, and some of the missions. They're just lots and lots of great stories about F-4 Phantoms. I've had a chance to meet a couple of pilots and talk to them personally about it, and the love that they have for that aircraft, the joy they had with the mission, but also the feeling of safety and superiority that came from flying a Phantom. There are some very, very active Facebook groups that keep the stories alive, and where pilots and crew chiefs and crew members gather to tell stories and share pictures. And there's just a lot of information. It's a great aircraft, and one that I sure loved going back and reading a little bit more about and talking about with you guys tonight.
David Rowe.
Yeah, absolutely. All accounts, you're exactly right. It's just a legendary jet, both of the Vietnam War and the Cold War. I mean, you had to think that those pilots, when they saw those Phantoms coming up at them, that they had a little fear in their heart, but that's what that plane was built to do. and it was enormous. It was big. It was fast. But like you said, it was kind of brutish in its appearance, but man, did it fly fast. And one of the interesting things I read, these are sort of compliments, but not compliments. They said that the Phantom is proof that with enough power, a brick will fly. There was another major said that when I first saw the Phantom, I thought it was so ugly, I wondered if it had been delivered upside down.
Ouch.
But, the results that the Phantom produced over those years, they speak for themselves. That plane was a master of the air and was a great design. Kudos to the McDonnell Corporation for building a great airplane. And like you said, the pilots and the mechanics that kept those birds flying and the stories that they can tell about what that plane was able to do are they're amazing to read. The more you read about it, the more you want to read more. What else could they do with it? So you're right. It was the world's largest distributor of MiG parts, and it earned that name.
Indeed.
Definitely. Well, as always, guys, it was a wonderful conversation about a great plane.
Absolutely enjoyed
Thanks
it.
for having us.
Yes, great plane.
I'm going to talk for just a second about our social media. All of our social media will be listed in the description of this podcast below. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and most all the rest of them. And David Rowe, your website, you said you was making some updates to your website. What you got going on there? Tell the folks about that.
Oh, yeah. It's aerophile.com, AEROWEPHILE.com, aerophile.com. About a week ago, I went down to Sevierville, Tennessee, and found a P-3 Orion parked on the side of a road in pieces. Apparently, someone had the wild idea to turn it into a bed and breakfast up in the mountains of Sevierville. So I drove over there and took some pictures, and those have been uploaded to my website. So go check those out. It's very unusual to see. It's kind of a weird roadside attraction. While I was there, people would pull up and take pictures and drive off. Just updating the website. I've got videos coming out on my YouTube channel under the Aerophile name as well from my visit to Thunder over Michigan this summer and to my Warbirds over Monroe. So I've got a lot of airshow videos coming out for the next couple of months. So
good deal.
Please
enjoying those. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, check them out.
Indeed.
So for Dave Gorman, David Rowe, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.